The Last of Us Part 2 had big shoes to fill. Naughty Dog's original game set the bar for narrative-driven blockbusters back in 2013, to the point where a lot of people weren't even sure if a sequel was even necessary. And I include myself in that population. Fortunately, not only is The Last of Us Part 2 one of the most powerful, moving video games I have ever played in my life, it's also one of the best media pieces in general that I've consumed over the past decade. It more than justifies its existence. The second title picks up a few years after the original left off, with players now in the shoes of an adult Ellie who's out to hunt down the people who've wronged her. Yeah, that's pretty much all I can say on the premise front for now. Fortunately, the developers have made it no secret that this is a game about hate, and that theme permeates every single aspect of this sequel. Yes, we're playing as Ellie again, but this is an older, colder, and overall more troubled version of this character we know so well. The events of the first game weigh over every decision the character makes in Part 2, and this time around we get to see her dark side, which was only really reserved for Joel in the first game. With adulthood, some of that childlike naivete has indeed worn off, but this is still very much the Ellie we knew from the first game, albeit grown up and now scarred with hatred. Thankfully, the script written by Neil Druckmann and Hallie Gross has more than done this theme and this character justice. From the micro to the macro, every part of this plot interrogates cycles of violence leading to more cycles of violence. Grief and trauma are concepts that have rarely been handled this well, and in the context of the game, they're given this almost mythical, biblical framing. However, despite how apocalyptic all of this may seem, this isn't just a nasty, ugly game that puts its characters through the ringer just for the sake of it. In fact, it's an incredibly tender game at times, full to the brim with quiet humanity. Thoughtful insights into protagonists we thought we knew so well, small moments of hope that gleam through the darkness, and palpable chemistry between the leads makes for entire sequences that directly contrast with the otherwise harsh and uncompromising narrative. The game is about hate, yes, but that makes the moments of levity, of love and humanity resonate that much more with the player because of the contrast. The Last of Us Part 2 is all about nuance. Nobody is entirely good or evil, nobody entirely full of love or hate, and often you can't have one of those things without having the other. That's the core concept that this game interrogates. All of this is backed up by the performances as well. Ashley Johnson and Troy Baker are better than they've ever been, no doubt helped by the advancements in motion capture technology since the last installment. Now, even subtle emotions are captured with industry-leading fidelity, and it overall just makes these characters feel that bit more human. In fact, there are some cutscenes where you don't even want the game to start back up, because you're so content in watching some of the best directed and best performed scenes in video game history. While I can't and wouldn't dare dream to talk too much about the plot either, I can say that this is a game that does not play things safe. It's unafraid to make some really bold narrative decisions, and some that you might find yourself, at first anyway, maybe even disagreeing with. Now, The Last of Us Part 2 could have been a good game by simply giving you more of the same formula that the directors and developers gave you 7 years ago. Instead of giving you what you want though, it kind of gives you what you need instead, which in this case is a thoughtful, contemplative, and hugely effective extension of this narrative that faithfully actually complements the narrative of the first game, even if at first they might seem like polar opposite products. And to be totally truthful with everyone out there, I entered this game wanting actually something of a comfort blanket. Seeing Ellie and Joel again felt like I was reconnecting with old friends, and as a result, I was giving the new cast a bit of a cold shoulder. It's a testament to the quality of the team's writing then that not only do you warm to this new cast, but in fact they become some of the game's best elements. This is the best thing about The Last of Us Part 2. It has a clear reverence for the original game, and more importantly, your investment in that original experience. It absolutely does not take that for granted, and at virtually every step rewards that investment. There are countless references and callbacks, some character building moments only die-hard fans would pick up on, and in general this narrative only works so well because it builds on everything that came before. But at the same time, this isn't a game about fan service or keeping you warm under that comfort blanket. As a result, there are going to be elements that are divisive for sure, but Naughty Dog justifies each and every single one of them, bringing them all together in an absolute killer of a climax. In an era where so many games are scared to experiment, The Last of Us Part 2 challenges and subverts what the player expects at pretty much every step, but not simply for the sake of it. You're going to have some knee-jerk reactions to some things, undoubtedly, I know I did, but wait until you see the full picture because it really does all come together. Speaking of surprises, it's impossible to talk about The Last of Us Part 2 now without addressing the issue of the leaks. And now, having retroactively looked at everything that's been circulating, I can say that this game is just so much more than a couple of context-free moments that might have made their way online. This isn't an experience that you can just sum up in a few moments. This is a 20+ hour event full to the brim with memorable moments and surprises and great payoffs and development, and even the things that you think you might know, you don't fully know. It's not a story that can be spoiled when you know what's coming, because it's not a plot so thin to only be supported by those twists or those gotcha moments. And also, not everything you read is to be believed. What makes The Last of Us 2 so special though is that it uses the medium of video games to elevate everything from the story to the themes to the characters to the gameplay. Naughty Dog titles in the past have essentially been criticized for being great movies with decent gameplay, but this game synergizes those two elements in a way that the developers' titles just haven't previously. The gameplay informs the narrative and vice versa, leading to some moments that are only so powerful because you're the one actually playing them. Even better, this synergy isn't only something reserved for the big set-piece moments, but it's actually happening every single second in the moment-to-moment gameplay. Through combat, Naughty Dog makes you feel the full gamut of emotions, from euphoria and relief to complete despair and utter disbelief. And look, without a doubt, this is one of the most violent games I have ever played, but despite being incredibly grim, that violence isn't gratuitous. Instead, it's in service of making the world feel grounded and getting you to question what you're doing and who the people you're killing actually are. In fact, at this point, it makes Spec Ops: The Line's attempts to make you think about video game violence feel like a bit kid stuff. Yeah, ostensibly, you're only murdering voxels and triangles in a video game, but when these enemies are crying out for their companions, discussing their plans for romantic getaways with their partners, or playing a PlayStation Vita right before you brutally stab them to death, they feel like real people. Even the simple act of giving each one a name makes you think twice about what you're doing to them. The writers have already explained that to them, there are no heroes or villains in the world of The Last of Us Part 2, and while many games have made that claim before, it's never been truer than in here. The factions and specific characters, hell, even the background NPCs, all have goals and motivations that are clearly communicated to you, that it isn't simply the case of you being the good guy, fighting and killing the bad guys. You can see love and hate, reason and arrogance in pretty much everyone, even the faction that likes to string its enemies up and then pull out their intestines. Trust me. In general, the combat is a huge step up over the previous installment mechanically as well, with so many more options in how you actually approach these encounters. The arenas here are large, giving you the ability to sneak in undetected, going guns blazing, or more likely, engage in a mixture of the two. An impressive list of accessibility and difficulty options are available to you as well, allowing players to tweak the experience thoroughly to their own abilities. The newfound agility the player has also adds to the combat options. The sheer act of going prone to sneak through the grass is an absolute godsend, while the added verticality to the levels not only gives you more combat options and ways to sneak around, but also increases the threats massively. You're not quite Nathan Drake, but Ellie is far more agile in combat than Joel ever was in the original Last of Us. What's thankfully not lost from this expanded scope though is the scrappy nature of the combat. Yes, there are going to be times where things go positively tits up and you're going to have to resort to chucking bricks and just taking wild swings with melee attacks. The intense game of cat and mouse inherent to The Last of Us's gameplay has always been its biggest mechanical strength, and that is only doubled down on here. Sadly, most weapons and gadgets are holdovers from that original game, but Naughty Dog have admittedly tightened them all up and made them feel better than ever. Character upgrades actually feel worthwhile, while the weapon upgrades dramatically alter the effectiveness of each of your weapons via some ridiculously satisfying workbench animations. Exploration and environments are a noticeable standout as well. Naughty Dog's post-apocalyptic take on Seattle is hauntingly beautiful and, more importantly, full of imagination. While you'll start out with the familiar, the overgrown streets, the libraries, the suburbs, things like that, you'll eventually venture to parts of the city you would have never dreamt of going. Also, these environments can be terrifying, like genuinely scary. This game does not shy away from its horror roots, and there were so many times when playing with headphones, I was just jumping out my skin because these levels are so well constructed and so well designed, and yeah, when you're fighting the infected, things get pretty spooky. The environments aren't just great because they are pretty though, but because they actually feel lived in. The Last of Us takes the concept of wide linear to the extreme, and most chapters as a result have huge areas for you to freely explore. While there's no side missions per se, optional areas come with their own unique combat encounters and rewards, such as safes to crack alongside optional conversations that flesh out the characters. And I say they're optional, they technically are, but you're absolutely going to want to seek all of these out. Some of the best character moments came when exploring areas off the beaten path, and you aren't going to want to miss any of them. Take your time, sink it all in, and just enjoy being in this world. More importantly though, the act of exploration is fun as well. There's a real sense of discovery not only in figuring out what happened to these places you're exploring, but simply how to get from A to B, or unlock a door. That's because all of this is accomplished in real time, and while the puzzles aren't exactly challenging, there is still a sense of satisfaction when you do figure them out. Levels that start off intimidating and challenging become conquerable because you're using your own common sense to get around, not simply following a waypoint on the map. And when it comes to the notes and journal entries strewn across this landscape, Naughty Dog have upped their game yet again. The devs have essentially taken that great-ish storyline from the very first game and used that as the template for every single note you'll come across in this sequel. You'll constantly be stumbling across interlinking stories, some of which actually occur throughout the entirety of the game rather than just across one area. And even better, not only are these captivating and interesting in their own right, but all of them thematically link into Ellie's overall personal story. Of course, despite my gushing praise, The Last of Us 2 isn't perfect, and there are a few minor drawbacks that you will notice on your journey. For one, Naughty Dog repeats some level design tricks a couple too many times. Like for real, when you're playing, you will notice how many times you were walking down a corridor to try a locked door, only to turn around and have the real path visible at that point. Also, the enemy AI isn't as much of a step forward as it can be, and it can be sometimes frustrating to know when you are in their line of sight and when you're successfully hidden behind cover. It's also a real shame that the game doesn't really make use of blending encounters between human and infected like in the Left Behind DLC. They're mostly segregated, although there are a couple of standout instances where they do mesh. It's just not as much of a main feature as many of us might have expected. Still, those are incredibly minor, and overall, The Last of Us Part 2 is a remarkable achievement. With its narrative and gameplay working in perfect synergy, it's delivered a challenging and hugely emotional experience that could only be fully realized in this medium. Some narrative decisions are undoubtedly going to spark some discussion, but none of them were made in bad faith, and ultimately they all push this story towards an emotional conclusion and actually strengthen the themes of the original game. It makes the original game even more complex. Trust me, you ain't seen nothing yet. So if you aren't convinced already, this game absolutely gets a solid 5 stars from me, and that is actually a rating I've never given on this channel ever before. I don't think I've gone over 4, so, you know, I don't know what that says about me or the game, but I think it's high praise nonetheless. Either way, I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Have you been won over by this review? It's been such a strange one to talk about because there is so much to pick apart, and the things I actually like the most I can't talk about because they're all under embargo and I don't want it to spoil it for anyone, but man, yeah, if you haven't guessed, I loved it, and we're actually going to be answering some questions on launch day, so if you want to leave those in the comments below, things you might be worried about, things you want to know before playing. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about any spoilers, but you know, in terms of gameplay, in terms of characters, stuff like that, we're going to have a video up, and yeah, so look forward to that. I look forward to talking to everyone about what actually happens. Hope you're excited. I'll see you soon. Bye.